What's up everybody? We are making a ring in today's video. This is a ring made of a stainless steel core, a walnut veneer bentwood, inlaid with Lapis Lazuli, a metallic blue pigment mixed with some cobalt blue strontium aluminate. It's finished with a CA finish as well. I'll be showing you how I made it, what tools I use, but I will also tell you what tools you could substitute if you don't have some of the stuff I have at home, and just talking about my methods and the techniques I used to create this ring. It's a really nice one. It's got a really nice little shine to it. Not everything came out perfect, and I will explain what went wrong and what you could do differently throughout the process of the video. But without further ado, thank you for stopping by and watching it, and enjoy!
Okay, so what we're starting with here is a rolled up piece of walnut veneer that I cut to, I'd say maybe 20 to 25mm wide, and the first step is to sand each end of this down until it's paper thin, maybe about the last sort of 5 to 10mm of each end. To get the veneer to this stage is the only real thing that I'm not showing because it's quite simple and very easy to do. You just need some hot water. You could boil the kettle or boil some water on the stove, but I tend to just fill the bathroom sink up with the water as hot as it will come out of the tap when it's fully warmed up, so that it's hot enough that you wouldn't keep your hand in it for very long. Soak the wood in there for about 30 minutes, the strip of veneer, and then roll it around something and wrap it up around something circular like a socket, something like that, and then wrap it in masking tape, leave it about 24 hours, and when you unwrap it, just check that it's thoroughly, completely dry throughout, and then you're ready to unwrap it a bit and start sanding it down here like this until it's paper thin. Then the next stage is to take your CA adhesive. The CA is a cyanoacrylate adhesive, which is basically just a posh way of saying a form of super glue, and start attaching it, in our case, to this stainless steel ring core. Now the stainless steel ring core is what I'm using. Whether you're using a core or whether you're just making a straight bentwood ring will depend exactly on what you're making. If you're making just a bentwood ring without a metal core, then you would be doing this stage around a former, like a socket or something, which is around the ring size that you're aiming for. If you were doing this, of course you don't want to be gluing it to the former. You'll want to wrap it, and then when the two parts of the wood meet on the first wrap around the circular object, begin gluing there. But because I'm building the ring around a stainless steel comfort core, what I am doing is gluing the veneer itself to that stainless steel core. It's important to make sure that you get a decent amount of the CA adhesive on, and then roll a very, very tight grip around that stainless steel core. For this stage, you only really need to be putting the glue where the core is, and then when you get to this stage where you're on wood, then you want to start adding the CA adhesive right across the board, across the whole piece of veneer. It's essential to make sure that your wraps are nice and tight, so what I do here is once I'm onto the wood stage, I'll then move to using the nozzle of the bottle of CA itself, and I'm spreading it out with a cocktail stick. You want to make sure that you cover the entirety of the veneer, and then as you wrap it nice and tight, you'll notice a little bit will seep out of the edges, and then you want to spray some of this CA activator spray, which will just instantly cure the glue. And as you spray that, those bits that are seeping out of the edge will immediately harden and hold that tight wrap you've put in place, which will give the CA in the middle of the wrap a chance to cure properly. And it's essential that you make sure that the wrap is nice and tight so that you don't end up with any gaps or air pockets or anything like that in your bentwood wrap, because otherwise you could end up, as you sand the ring down into shape, you could end up with gaps which could completely ruin the ring. Once you get to the final part here, I just use a cocktail stick to press down on it to save getting the glue all over my fingers, and just use a little shot of that activator, and then you should end up with a nicely tight wrapped bentwood piece around your core. The next stage is to sand away all of that excess wood. Now I use a very large strip of veneer simply because it makes getting that tight wrap a lot easier without having a smaller, more flimsy piece of veneer which you could end up splitting. It does mean that there's more sanding, but for me this isn't a problem because here you can see I'm using a Dremel with a sanding wheel, so this whole process, even though it's sped up in this video, only takes a few minutes. If you don't have a Dremel, it's not a problem. My first few rings, I didn't have a Dremel or my wood lathe or anything. I just had this little hobby vise and a lot of sandpaper, which you can do. You just want to keep sanding it on a flat surface and keep going until everything's flush, which you'll see me doing in the next stage, because I'll only take this Dremel wheel until I've left myself a few mil of the wood around that stainless steel core, and then the rest I will true up on some sandpaper on a flat surface on my cutting mat here. To do this, you just want to move the ring around in a figure of 8 motion. Obviously I've sped this video up tremendously because it is a longer process. So if you cut a strip of veneer as wide as I do to get that really nice tight wrap easily, and you don't have a way of sanding away a lot of that excess quick, this stage will take a long time. It will be slightly sweaty, it will be hard work, but it is entirely doable. Like I say, my first few rings I didn't have any of these power tools at all and I still managed it, and in some ways it even makes it all the more rewarding. But if you've got a Dremel, or if you've got a belt sander or anything that can do some of the work for you, it's a great way of saving yourself a bit of time. Essentially, you've just got to keep up this figure of 8 sanding until you get the wood entirely flush with the core. If you don't have a metal core in there, this is a bit more difficult because you need to make sure that you get both edges nice and parallel and everything nice and straight so you have a good shape for the end of the ring. But if you don't have a metal core in it, it can just be a bit more difficult to do so you have to pay a bit more attention. If you've got a metal core in there, it's just as simple as sanding down until you're flat with that. So now I've mounted the ring onto my lathe and I'm just adding a little bit of tape to the thinner side of the spindle just to hold it in place, and setting everything up in a position ready to move the tool rest in when I need it, and then I'm going to move in and start sanding that nice beveled edge shape into the ring and get it rounded so that it has a nice comfort fit. To do this, I'm just using a 180 grit sandpaper, aluminium oxide. I'm just slowly going over it bit by bit and just trying to shape in a nice bend to the shape of the ring so it's nice and comfortable on the finger. Now that I've got that shape that I wanted, it's time to carve out the inlay channel. Now this is where the main thing that went wrong with this ring today happened. I used this little hobby chisel that I got on Amazon. It came in a set of about 12 of them and it was only about £10, and the quality of it was just absolute rubbish. The tip of it actually worn down and bent just going through this wood, so it ended up carving in the inlay channel not very straight because of the way the tip of it bent, and it ended up kind of ruining the overall finish of the ring for me, which is why you can see me trying to go through it here and straighten it up with a file and sandpaper, because one side of it came out a bit thicker than the other, and certain parts of it were actually where the chisel bent, it left the inlay not the exact same shape all the way around the ring, which kind of ruined the finish of it. But hey, we're all still learning, it's part of a learning curve, and I just won't be using those cheap rubbish tools again. So what you can see me doing here is just adding drops of the CA adhesive and sprinkling in those crushed Lapis Lazuli stones, and then covering those and covering in the gaps with the mix of the blue pigment and the cobalt blue strontium aluminate glow powder, and then trying to sand that flush with the ring surface. Again, still just using the 180 grit sandpaper and just trying to get everything flush, and then just using a wet wipe there just to clean out any of the dust, just so that we can see where we're at with getting everything nice and flush. And this is just a case of going over it as many times as it takes so that you've only got the material for the inlay within that inlay channel. I was finding it was taking a little bit longer, so I switched down to a 120 grit there and then gave it a wipe down, and it had got to where we needed it to, but that initial sand obviously can sometimes rip out little chunks of the glue and the powder. There I'm just using a little bit of isopropyl alcohol as well, just on a little cotton swab, just to really give that a little clean before we start adding a bit more of the CA, and then I'm going to go over it again with that powder and just fill in those little gaps that have come out from that initial first sand. Spray a little bit of activator on it and then back in with the sandpaper to get it all flush. And then we continue to sand and keep cleaning it until everything's all nice and flush and how we want it. And then it's a case of adding a nice layer of the CA glue there, and as you can see I'm just poking down into any of the little gaps that have appeared in the sanding there, just to make sure that the CA fills in all the gaps, because I'm only working with a medium CA here. I've got some extra thin and some very thin CAs in the post on their way to me, but I just wanted to get making a ring today before some of my other new supplies that I've ordered came in the post. So essentially what I'm doing here is just adding the CA layer by layer and then spraying a little bit of activator, and the video is broken up here, and I normally spray the activator and then give it 5 to 10 minutes between each spray just to really give it a good cure. And also I'll leave the room after spraying a little bit of that activator because it's not very nice to breathe in constantly. Generally, you want to build up about 8 to 10 layers of this CA, I find is a good amount. I think I lost count here, and watching it over now and doing this voiceover, I've lost count again. I may have only done 6 or 7, I couldn't say for sure, but 8 to 10 is the magic number I find, which gives you a nice finish on the ring. And now what I'm going to do is remove those extra layers of the tape so that I can get it off, and I'm going to swap over to my 3-jaw chuck so that I can put the ring in side on and add the same kind of finish to the edges of the ring. I do this with a cocktail stick, and I won't be spinning the lathe by power, I just do it by hand so that I can just gently apply that finish, and I add I think about 3, 4 or 5 layers to the edges because they don't come into contact with as much stuff, and it's generally just to make it nice and smooth so that it's comfortable on the finger. So now I'm going to flip the ring over and do the same to the other side. Again, just gently applying it with a cocktail stick and spraying a little bit of that CA activator in between coats. And now we start with the finishing process of the ring. So I'm just using a 180 grit quickly there to begin with, just to sand out any bumps, and then wet sanding. On the edges, I don't go too crazy. I generally go a 400, a 600, an 800, a 1000 grit, a 1200 grit, and a 1500 grit. This just allows you to bring the ring to a really nice smooth finish, so then when you move to the polishing stage, you can get those edges really nice and smooth so you get a real nice comfortable fit on the finger. It's essential to make sure that you keep the sandpaper wet during this stage because you don't want to take out much of that CA, especially on these edges, because I didn't put as many coats on. It's just making sure that it's nice and smooth. And after doing both sides, I'll just give it a quick clean up and check, and I'm happy, so I'm going to take the 3-jaw chuck off and put my spindle back on the lathe, so then we can work on doing the same wet sanding on the outer diameter of the ring. Now on the outer diameter, because this is the part which is going to take the brunt of any day-by-day knocks and bangs, and also it's going to be the part you're really going to want to shine up and polish, I'll go through the same grits up to that 1500, but then I'll also go to an 1800, a 2000, a 2500 and a 3000 grit, wet sanding all the way through, and just using one of those wet wipes as I go through, just to clean off all of the gunk. And this is the last one here, this is the 3000 grit, and then everything's all nice and smooth, and everything's looking nice there. So now it's down to the polishing and finishing stage. So I'm going to be using a polishing wheel on my Dremel here, and I'm just using Auto Glim Super Resin Polish, which is a car paint polish. It's all I had to hand when I started making rings, and the first ring I polished with it, even by hand when I didn't have my Dremel, just came out so shiny that I realised that actually it works perfectly fine for this application, and there was an even bigger bottle than the one I'm nearly finished of there on offer the other day, so I picked up a big bottle and I'm just going to continue to use it because it's a great all-round polish, and it just does the job exactly as I need it to. It's not specifically for wood or jewellery, it is for cars, but a polish is a polish in my eyes, and using the Dremel wheel, you have to make sure if you're using a Dremel, don't use it on high speed, because the heat that can put off can end up melting through your CA finish and ruining it. And then my final stage here, which I don't see a lot of other people doing, is I actually use a wax, which is also meant for cars. It's a Carnauba wax, I think it's pronounced, and essentially I just put some of that on my other polishing wheel on my Dremel. I'll give it a minute to start drying out and curing, and then I will just spend a long time going over it and really buffing that wax in. And what the wax does is, not only does it give it a good protection from moisture and whatnot, but it really adds an extra layer of shine on top of that polish, and it really just makes the finish of the ring pop and look awesome. I don't see many other people making rings on YouTube going as far as adding a coat of wax after they've done a polish, and it's something I found has really added a next level of shine after polishing, and it's something I'll be continuing to do on every ring that I use a CA finish with, because it just adds that extra level of shine, but also adds that extra bit of protection from the elements, as well as water. Any water you get on it when washing your hands or anything will just bead straight off. Okay, and there we have it. We're pretty much entirely finished with this ring build now. Just finishing off those last few little buffs on that wax to get a really good shine. And then we're going to go to a little close-up I took a little bit later in the day with the light on my camera, just to show how nice and smooth and shiny that finish came out. Looks really good. You can see there where the inlay gets wider in places because of that crappy little chisel I tried using, which, you know, you win some, you lose some. I won't be using that tool again, but we managed to get a real nice thin Bentwood ring, which makes it really comfortable this time round, which was great. And I think it came out brilliant, considering, you know, I'm still quite new to this craft, and apart from the slightly unparalleled edges to that inlay channel, I think it looks really nice. So we're going to turn off the light here, hit it with the UV torch, and get that glow powder charged up so you can see how cool this ring looks when that inlay is glowing and showing off just where those rocks of lapis are in between it. It just really makes everything pop and makes everything look really cool when it's on the finger and you're not in a very bright space. It's a really neon glow from this cobalt blue powder, and I was really happy with how that looked. So anyway, that's the end of this build. Hope you enjoyed watching it, and please consider subscribing, because we'll be having a lot more of these ring making videos coming out in the near future. But thanks again for stopping by and watching, and enjoy making your own rings at home.